Hey students, this lecture is on yoga health effects. We'll look at the larger field of yoga's effects, especially from the traditional yoga perspective. In the past, yoga was threaded together with Ayurveda, which is the medical system of India. And the postures were used for health in that system. But also there was this kind of larger material aim of yoga, and I mentioned in a previous lecture, which aimed towards what's called vibhuti or siddhi, which are miraculous powers, as well as amrta, immortality. So these were common goals in the system, and with our modern scientific consciousness, we tend to dismiss some of the claims of yoga. But I might suggest that in the days in which these goals were pursued, there was a different consciousness, a different awareness, a different way of working with universal energies, which made things possible which we probably don't imagine are possible with our current mindset. Mindsets of human civilizations change, and with those changes, different possibilities emerge. And this whole kind of storied background we have, even in Western culture, of magic, is even stronger in the tantric traditions of India, where a lot of claims are made for the power of ritual, mainly, and working with subtle energies to direct them in ways that are advantageous for the material world. This was a form of kind of spiritualized materialism, we might say, that was very strong in India. And it manifested in yoga through these pursuits of what we call siddhis, siddhis, powers. And they have all kinds of claims for these miraculous powers. But I don't want to go too much into that in this lecture. I want to talk about how yoga in the modern medical paradigm has proved to be intensely valuable. And this information keeps steamrolling. More and more tests are being done because yoga appeals to a demographic of people who are usually a little more deeply invested in their professional lives. It's a bit of a higher demographic practice often. So these people are doing yoga, and they are medical researchers, or they are doctors, or they are other kinds of scientifically minded people, and they get curious about the actual subjective experience of yoga that they're receiving, and they explore it. Some of the basic things that we know is that, and this is yoga at the most basic level, and it's a easy hook on which to recommend yoga for you, and if you actually experience these things, to recommend it for others. Yoga works with the parasympathetic nervous system. It succeeds actually in getting us to calm the fight or flight response. The fight or flight response produces certain endocrine secretions in the body, the primary one of which is cortisol. And cortisol is a hormone which provokes a series of effects which prepare you for stressful circumstances. Of course, this is primal material that is rooted in our body from ancient confrontations with animals or war, other kind of emergency events. And what cortisol does is it withdraws blood away from your center and puts it into your limbs so that you can fight. It makes you have a greater hunger for sugars, because you need sugar to translate into energy, so that you'll have energy to fight or run. It takes food, it makes the digestive system work differently, so that it only draws energy out of the nutrients and digests food quickly, of course. You don't want that food in your body. You don't want that food undigested, because you need the energy right away. So the body sets itself up to utilize the food in a quick way and not to get its full nutritional value, because you can get its full nutritional value at some other point when you don't have to fight this buffalo or whatever else is confronting you. So it does that. It tends to move the development of fat to this kind of ugly place in the body, the fat tire, where none of us want it, because that's the place where you're most protected. That's the place where the food can be stored safely. Yeah. So fight or flight has a set of cascading effects on us, which are unfortunate. And yoga does an in-run around a lot of these effects of cortisol. Another thing, of course, it does is it narrows, fight or flight narrows our attentive sphere. It puts us into reactivity. It makes us judge things more in black and white rather than series of grays, because situations are dire, and we usually don't have the time to evaluate things based on a spread of circumstances or evidence. We have to react quickly to overt events at the risk of perhaps killing somebody else or doing some other terrible event. But the goal, of course, is to save our own biological being. So the mind narrows itself and looks for only the most prominent patterns and reacts to those rather than responds to those. It doesn't do a whole lot of evaluation. It does a lot of reactivity. So cortisol also does that to the mental apparatus. And as you can probably extrapolate from what I just said, that spreads into our social sphere. And we get very reactive. We get very reactive on social media. We get very reactive in our cars. We get very reactive around political events because they seem to be existential threats. We actually develop a metabolism of looking for existential threats, of imagining existential threats. And this is a danger not only to our own lives, because we can't have a full, rich life unless we allow subtleties to arise, unless we cultivate love, which is one of the higher practices, the higher possibilities of the human nervous system. We can't always be at war. So yoga is a very valuable system for getting us to stretch, to getting us to relax, to get us to be in the moment, to open up the tissues so that these fascia, it's kind of like saran wrap that wraps all of our internal organs, can loosen, and therefore your organs can begin to operate the way they're supposed to, so that you can fully digest your food, so that your spleen works properly, so that your gallbladder works properly, so that these organs have the freedom to move, because you're doing twists in yoga and back bends and forward bends. You're working with the core in so much more of a fuller way than the martial, warrior-oriented calisthenic systems that came out of the West, which focus on the limbs, the ability to throw a spear, the ability to pull an arrow, the ability to swing a sword. That's so much the stronger legacy of calisthenic systems in the West. The yoga legacy comes, of course, from a spiritual set of practices, a set of nurturing practices, a set of preparation practices, so that we can go more into the parasympathetic state. I actually reversed those in the early part of my lecture. It's a sympathetic state that we stay in, which is fight or flight. We want to move into the parasympathetic state. And from that state, we have more conscious tools available to us. We have the capacity to calm the mind so that we can become in that more unobstructed mental state, more perceptible state. And this is how we reach towards higher consciousness. So, and then when we start to work at the energetic level, what we do is we start to have to calm the prana. We start to calm the chitti in the mind, the moving energy in the mind, and the moving energy in the body, which is a little bit grosser, which we call prana. So hatha yoga calms prana, meditation calms chitti. Of course, they both work together. There's synergistic effects. But this is the primary way in which the work of yoga calms us at a physiological level and calms us at an energetic level to prepare us for the higher functions of humanity and health in our body. Thanks for listening.